This is like bees. These are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of individual nodes sitting on the grid edge in people's homes and businesses. And when we do it right, the individual homeowner or business is benefiting from being part of this program. They are receiving a lower utility bill. They are receiving some type of a grid reward for having done these things. And we owe that to them. That's the way the business model works. When you zoom out, we start to look at clusters, or we start to look at geographies, maybe a subdivision that sits behind a transformer, or a data center that's sitting behind a transformer. And then we start to look at these things together and we say, okay, if I take 10,000 of these individual systems, I now have 50 megawatts of energy that I can bid into the market. I now have 100 megawatt hours of capacity that I can bid into the market and that I can use in the market. So we very much look like, at grid scale, we look like a power plant.
Hello and welcome back to Transmission. As the adoption of residential storage gains traction, the opportunity for these assets to give back to the grid and even earn a revenue is made possible with the help of virtual power plants. In today's episode, Geoff Ferrell, Senior Vice President of Global C&I and VPP Project Business in the Americas at Sonnen Inc, joins Quentin to discuss the potential of virtual power plants. If you're enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review wherever you listen. Let's jump in.
Hello, Geoff. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I must admit, I've been a bit of a fanboy of Sonnen for many years, so it's a real pleasure to have you on. Doing hardware is very, very difficult. Doing hardware in Europe is even more difficult, and it's been great to see the success story that Sonnen has been on. Before we get stuck into that, though, Geoff, do you want to just tell us about you and what you do at Sonnen and a bit about the company, please?
Sure. Yeah, let's start with the company. Yeah, so Sonnen is originally a German stationary energy storage manufacturer, founded in 2010. Our mission from day one was clean and affordable energy for everyone, by way of a piece of hardware, and then doing things with that hardware, most commonly connected to solar. But solar is certainly not necessary to make some of the things that we do across the planet work really well. So I'm sure we'll go into that more. Myself, my name is Geoff Ferrell. I'm a Senior Vice President of our virtual power plants and project business, specifically for Sonnen Inc, which is the U.S. Subsidiary of the company. I've been with Sonnen about going on 5 years now. I come from construction, so I was an engineer by education in the construction field, residential and commercial, for about 10, 11 years before I came over to Sonnen. And I too am a fanboy. I actually started as a customer. So as a construction chief technology officer for a construction company, we were building highly sustainable, durable, healthy, energy efficient housing. And we were doing it in such a way that it was at market rate. Everyone could access it. It wasn't for the one percenters. It wasn't for a niche part of the market. And we decided that we had an opportunity in conjunction with the utility to do solar, small solar, and a battery. And when I was looking for a battery, I came across Sonnen. It was exactly what we were looking for. That was, about 9 years ago now. So I spent 4 years integrating Sonnen batteries into the homes I was building, and then had the opportunity to come over to Sonnen and take it nationwide. And here we sit.
And if you're listening to this and you haven't come across this company yet, I think my take on it is Sonnen was the first company really to position residential storage for the home, for the consumer. And of course, Tesla, Powerwall, and loads of other companies have copied this now. But you guys had some great designs, hardware that looked good in the home, and lots of great imagery about pulling up in your EV, this beautiful house and this thing on the wall. The marketing was fantastic. And then, of course, German engineering and doing anything with battery cells out of Europe has been tricky because so much of it has been dominated by the Far East. And Sonnen has managed to do this and be a massive success. So kudos to the company. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the company. And I know there was a big transaction a few years ago where you got bought by Shell. That was obviously massive. Can you talk about the last decade or so, what the journey's been like for the company? I know you haven't been there for the whole time, but what the mission for the company was and where you started and where you are now. And there's been some news about Sonnen perhaps being up for sale. We should probably talk about that as well.
Okay. Yeah, we could talk about that. Yeah, I mean, day one, our founders, Christoph Ostermann and Torsten Stiefenhofer, their vision was stationary energy storage systems for the residential market. And it was in response to the German market, very specifically, starting to change some policies around what in the US we would call net metering. You could call it a grid feed-in tariff in other parts of the country, specific to solar. Germany, as many parts of the country or parts of the world have done a really great job with some subsidies, with some incentives around solar, getting a lot of solar into the grid. And then at some point you hit an inflection point and you say, hey, this really great thing is now starting, we're kind of going backwards. We're starting to see an increase in ESG. We're seeing an increase in carbon. We're seeing an increase in the need for peaking energy at certain hours of the day, and it happens to be when the sun goes down. So you hit this point. You do a really great thing. You get mass adoption of solar. You get a lot of solar on businesses, homes, schools, but a grid edge, if you will, kind of scenarios predominantly. And then what you say is, okay, how do we better harness the solar? How do we make solar firm, more dispatchable, more reliable? And the answer was a battery system, and a grid connected, internet connected battery, more specifically, where you could soak up excess solar during sunny hours that wasn't being consumed by the home directly. You could tell the battery, hold that charge, dispatch that charge during these particular hours, or to reply to particular signals in the marketplace. When the marketplace says, hey, we're short on energy, prices are going up. If you could deliver energy like a power plant, that's really valuable to us. Tell us what you can do and do it, and we'll pay you for that. And basically what our founders saw was an opportunity in the European market to do just that, with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual nodes in people's homes, again, in Europe, at the grid edge, where they could participate in what is now being called a virtual power plant. We can go into that later as well, because that's kind of a term that's become blockchain or green energy, or some of these. It's gotten a little bit heavy and long in the tooth. So we can talk about that more. But essentially, they identified ways where individual consumers could have this hardware in their home, could participate in rate plans or in programs where they could use their solar, use their battery more smartly, more surgically, and get paid to do so. And I think that was really kind of the start of it. And then in the US, that's taken a couple of different formats. We have a really robust business in Spain and Italy and Australia as well, kind of doing very similar things. So again, the hardware is great. But as you identified, Quentin, that's a tough market. There's a lot of push for commoditization of batteries, which could happen very easily, like we've seen with solar panels or with inverters to a certain extent. And I think Sonnen sees it a little bit differently, where we're using the energy storage system as a gateway to the home. It is an electrical piece of infrastructure that gets us into the home, and then it really is the virtual power plant and these other dynamic, SaaS services, if you will, that we use the battery to then harness, that are really the unique value proposition of Sonnen.
In that case, has Sonnen shifting its focus, if I heard you correctly, where the hardware is only one piece of the puzzle, but the big market opportunity you're going after is the software and the virtual power plant and automating the home? Is that where you're headed?
I'd say 100%. The hardware is important, and hardware is important because there is some really bad hardware out there. There's some unsafe hardware. There's some hardware that, if you do what we do to our batteries, over the course of a year, the state of charge of that battery is going to be diminished very quickly, and you could have very unhappy homeowners. We certainly have seen that in the US, probably more so than in Europe, where for years it was sold as a backup battery. So the battery literally sits in your home, in your basement, on the side of your home, waiting for a power outage. And if that battery is hit 3, 4, 5 times a year for a couple hours, you don't care about cycle count. You don't necessarily care about those things. But when you are performing grid services, when you are using the battery through a virtual power plant or through market mechanisms where you are cycling that battery every day, the chemistry matters, the durability matters, the safety of that battery matters. It's a connection to the internet. The effectiveness of that connection matters. So from Sonnen's perspective, the hardware is very important. The battery as a reservoir, as a gas tank, if you will, for energy, whether that's grid energy or solar energy or wind, whatever the source may be, is extremely important. But then to harness that reservoir through the virtual power plant, through software, through market signals is the end goal. That is how we affect energy transition. It is the ability to be firm, dispatchable, dynamic, and to be able to respond to these very dynamic signals, wherever we're operating at in the world.
And let's get an idea about the company now. So where's the company located? How many people do you have? How many batteries do you have out there in the real world doing stuff?
Sure, sure. Yeah, founded in 2010 in Bavaria, Germany. The name of the village, literally a village, is Wilpoldsried. It has been said that there may be more cows than people in the village. It's really very quaint. About an hour and a half west of Munich, so down in the south of Germany. Currently, I think I heard from the boss last week that we're about 1,200 employees worldwide. So that is spread out between various offices around Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK a little bit, Australia, and then we've got a pretty firm contingent here in the United States that is sales support, operations, and some of our R&D functions.
Great. And we're going to talk about VPP, virtual power plants, in a lot of detail in a minute. But can we just talk about what's it like now that Sonnen is part of Shell? So Shell bought Sonnen a few years ago for, I think it's 500 million euros, and recently announced that they were going to dispose of, sell the asset, I think it's the end of last year. And it looks like the valuation is 3 or 4x up on that. So Sonnen's been really growing at a clip. What's it been like as part of the journey, being part of Shell and now thinking about pastures new?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, purchased by Shell in 2019. The valuation has gone up quite a bit. Yeah, so it's, I credit that a lot to the leadership of Shell and to the leadership of Sonnen, based in Germany. The things that we've done over the last couple of years, we have grown tremendously. I think the resources and the organization that Shell has brought to us, kind of moving from a startup to a grow up to a little bit more mature company operating in multiple continents and many markets, has been phenomenal for us. So they certainly have an interesting balance sheet that we love to harness to aid the energy transition, and really just being part of that larger story around lower carbon fuels, zero carbon fuels, really looking at what the energy system is going to look like in the future has been an incredible journey. Certainly in the 4.5 5 years that I've been part of it. More specifically, yeah, they did announce a partial sale, or I guess you could use the word divestment in Sonnen. To be clear, what has been put out there is they're not trying to sell us. They are looking for partners. I think they're trying to sell a portion of the company, and my opinion, purely my opinion, is that we could do more. Sonnen could do more. We are a technology company and Shell is an energy company. The thought process and the way you operate in the structures and those two things are a little bit different. So I think Shell has seen value in bringing in a partner that has some more of those competencies, that does have interests in exploiting those possibilities in our nimbleness as a technology company. And I think that's where we're at. I really do. I haven't been in any of those conversations, so don't ask me to kind of be a fly on the wall and tell you what's happened because I wasn't invited. But talks continue from what we're told, at least internally. And I think we're all very hopeful that Shell will find a great partner to help us continue to grow and be a leader in the marketplace, both in the hardware and the virtual power plant fronts.
Yeah, well, excited to see what happens there. But energy in the residential world is all about distribution, isn't it? So any channel partners, or the more homes you can get into, the better. Now let's talk about virtual power plants, or VPPs, which you're right, actually, it's been through the ringer a little bit. VPPs there's a few things or words that, DERMS or VPP or grid edge, all these things that have been totally overused, and lots of promises made in the last decade, and in some cases didn't really deliver, and in other cases did. So let's talk a little bit about what a virtual power plant really is and what makes it virtual.
Yeah, so I think the word virtual is probably the first misnomer in the whole dang thing. Virtual is a little misleading. These are real assets bolted to people's homes, hooked up to their electrical system. So, when you look at the word DERMS or distributed energy, resources, what all the acronyms we throw at it, and we're terrible with acronyms in this industry. A lot of that was originally built around what we would call demand response. That's kind of been the term that's been around for decades. Demand response. This is, I'd like to control the thermostat in your home. I'd like to turn your lights on and off. I'd like to overheat or underheat your water heater, and maybe do these things where I can add load or deduct load from your home using these connected devices. And the issue has always been that those are tied to behavior. And unfortunately, at least in the US, the other issue is a lot of the housing stock in the United States doesn't lend itself to some of these techniques very well. Homes built 20 years ago are very, very leaky. So when you use a thermostat and you do this, what we would call a pre-cool and hold kind of strategy, where you would overcool the home prior to the peak period and say, okay, now we're going to stop your thermostat, not going to use it. I've cooled your home a little bit lower. It's not uncomfortably cold. It's not a meat locker, but we'll use that cool. We want to drift through the peak period. It just doesn't work because a lot of that air conditioning leaks out of a home, in about 45 minutes, an hour tops. You got people coming and going, you're cooking dinner. So this whole idea of demand response and controlling people's appliances like water heaters or thermostats or lighting is difficult, because ultimately what's going to happen is you come home, your home's uncomfortable one way or the other. You're probably not thinking about the fact that you signed up for this program that's going to pay you $25 at the end of the year. You go over to your thermostat and you hit the button and you make yourself comfortable. So demand response programs have always had this behavioral component that's been really difficult. And what happens is you have megawatts and megawatts and megawatts of capacity. And then when you go to market, you basically have to discount that heavily. And you say, I'm going to bid 50% of it because I don't know. Susie might come home and crank her thermostat up because her house is uncomfortable. We just don't know. And there's a lot of math around that. I think people know how effective those programs are. In the case of an energy storage system, specifically one bolted to your house and plugged into your electrical panel, it's completely behavior independent. If I move energy around, or if I harness solar, or if I discharge your battery, or if I charge from the grid and then later discharge from that battery to balance out the economics of it, you never felt it. You're going to come home, you're going to cook, you're going to clean, you're going to do laundry, you're going to plug in your iPad, watch TV, whatever. It's completely independent of behavior. So the advantage of a battery-based virtual power plant or distributed energy management system is that we are not behavior dependent. We are bolted to the wall. I'm not worried, is this thing plugged in or not? I'm not worried, is it a hot day or cold day? I'm not worried about these other things that may or may not exist in my ecosystem, because my ecosystem is bolted to the home and independent of what might be going on in the home at the moment.
So when you talk about virtual power plants, are you talking about a large fleet of domestic sites that you aggregate up and treat like a power plant? Or are you talking about each home being its own little power plant?
The answer is yes. So essentially, yeah, I mean, complicated answer. Sorry. Think of it as bees. In fact, we use the word swarm control a lot within the industry. This is like bees. These are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of individual nodes sitting on the grid edge in people's homes and businesses. And when we do it right, the individual homeowner or business is benefiting from being part of this program. They are receiving a lower utility bill. They are receiving some type of a grid reward for having done these things. And we owe that to them. That's the way the business model works. When you zoom out, we start to look at clusters, or we start to look at geographies, maybe a subdivision that sits behind a transformer, or a data center that's sitting behind a transformer. And then we start to look at these things together and we say, okay, if I take 10,000 of these individual systems, I now have 50 megawatts of energy that I can bid into the market. I now have 100 megawatt hours of capacity that I can bid into the market and that I can use in the market. So we very much look like, at grid scale, we look like a power plant. The advantage is we're in hundreds of thousands of different locations where we can inject or absorb energy in very small increments across multiple nodes, across multiple substations, if you will, as opposed to being one massive facility 100 miles, 50 miles outside of town. And then you have to transmit all that power down great big transmission lines, divvy that down through substations, and then get it out, where that creates a lot of congestion, creates a lot of wear and tear on the electrical infrastructure, and inevitably drives up operating and maintenance costs. If we do it from the grid edge and we attack the problem from hundreds of thousands of places, we completely negate all of the concerns around overloading of transformers, overloading of substations, additional congestion on the grid, because we can really target the way we respond to those signals very, very surgically, either geographically based or, kind of sub-lap, whatever the kind of the tell is that we're getting from the marketplace.
So let's talk for a little bit. Let's take stock on where Sonnen's at right now. So how many of these battery systems have you got installed out there? How many different sites have got Sonnen batteries on them? And then of those, what proportion of those are taking part in your virtual power plant solution? And what proportion are saying, I'm just going to handle it myself? So for example, lots of friends of mine have got batteries installed in their home. And in many cases, they're just taking solar power. They're not doing anything particularly smart around it. Somewhat might be linked to a carbon API. I've got some very nerdy friends, right? So some of them might be linked to some carbon APIs. Some of them might be just day-ahead prices, but they're just doing it more for fun. So what proportion of your Sonnen batteries are part of this big VPP thing? And what do all these numbers look like?
Great question. Worldwide, I believe we're over 170,000 systems installed worldwide. The vast majority are sold and installed for the purposes of being part of a virtual power plant. So the vast majority of our customers aren't looking for backup. To be perfectly honest, at least here in the US, if you're looking for a backup battery, there are other far less expensive solutions. But when you do harness the monetization potential of a Sonnen battery, either on your own, which is a great use case, just the same self-consumption, or you're a total nerd and out you're jockeying your battery on your own every day. If you're harnessing that battery for maximum monetization, or you are joining one of our Sonnen communities or Sonnen Connect, whatever the brand is, wherever you're at in the world, and letting us do it for you, what you're saying is, I want to achieve all those goals. I want to lower my carbon footprint. I want to be part of energy transition. I want to invest in a battery that's going to last me 10, 15, 20 years doing that, and be part of that community and be part of that thought process that an individual home or business can be part of the solution in a real way, not just, solar net metering, in markets where they have very low, potential. So I would say my guess is worldwide, well over 80% of the batteries that we've sold are actively participating in virtual power plants today. Europe is a high number. The United States is a high number. Over 90% of our sales happening today are being sold into marketplaces where they're using either Sonnen Connect or a utility program that aims to harness their battery on a daily basis in some way, as the genesis for buying a Sonnen battery versus somebody else's.
Wow. So we're looking at 100,000 or so plus of these batteries taking part in your virtual power plant. And then for Sonnen, do you sell a battery and then what's the value proposition? Is it, hey, come and buy a battery and put it on your house for, I don't know, however many dollars, or come and buy a battery and take our VPP service and we're going to make you more money or save you more carbon or something like that? How does the sale process work, and what decision does a customer have to make?
Again, the answer is both. I think if you're looking for, a few things about the hardware, let's start with the hardware. Again, since day one, the Sonnen battery has been lithium iron phosphate based chemistry since day one. We've never believed in some of these other chemistries that maybe work really well in cars or that work in a more commoditized battery. And we've always wanted to steer clear of cobalt, just for all of its recyclability and kind of economic and oppressive, attributes that come with that type of, with that mineral. So lithium iron phosphate from day one.
You're calling out NMC there. So you don't use NMC batteries, you just use LFP, and been doing that since day naught.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And the argument there is supply chain? The supply chain's the problem? Is that?
Not as well, maybe in the beginning, yeah, supply chain. A lot of these other chemistries were being dominated for the auto industry. And in the beginning, you would never put lithium iron phosphate in a car. Like, the thing would weigh a ton, it would last forever, yes, but it would weigh a ton. So in the beginning, people thought we were crazy. Like literally somebody from one of our competitors said, you'll never make it. Lithium iron phosphate is too expensive. It's too heavy. It's not energy dense enough. Well, if you're installing this in your home, if it's in your basement or your garage or somewhere, what do you care what it weighs? If we're efficient in the layout of the battery and we're not taking up your whole garage, taking up your whole your basement, the weight doesn't necessarily matter. So you can sacrifice that a little bit. And what we were more interested in was, if this is in a garage, if this is in a basement, if this is under your son or daughter or grandma's bedroom, what do you really want? You want the safest chemistry that will last you decades, that you can monetize, that you can earn your money back on, that will pay you back and will help you be part of this thing that you're investing in. So from a hardware standpoint, that was the call from day one. We didn't want to use a car cell. We didn't want to use these other cells. We wanted to use this. And in the beginning, Quentin, I would agree, the supply chain was very underutilizing lithium iron phosphate. Now, fast forward 15 years, and what are we seeing? everybody's moving away from NMC. They're moving away from aluminum cobalt. They're moving towards lithium iron phosphate, even in cars. So the supply chain is getting a little more strained. I think the infrastructure has caught up, but more importantly, what we're seeing in the industry is we're seeing an acceptance that this was the way to go, that longevity, durability, safety matter, whether it's a car or a stationary energy storage system. And we've seen the industry come our way. So were our founders geniuses? Yes. Did I say that on the podcast? Maybe. So, shout out to Torsten and Christoph. You guys got it right 15 years ago, and we appreciate that.
Well, yeah, I saw a thing the other day that I think almost half of all EVs built now have got LFP, so lithium phosphate batteries in them. And they are lower energy density. The margins are changing, actually. They're much more dense energy capacity than they used to be. And wildly cheaper and much more comfortable with supply chains. Well, depending on whether there's a whole podcast in itself about cell chemistry supply chains. I think that there's a lot more to it than just cobalt bad, but never mind. Okay, right. Let's get back to virtual power plants, because that's what we're here to talk about. So how do these batteries participate in the market? I know that Sonnen, you said, almost 200,000 of these systems around the world, and there's lots of different types of markets, but let's keep it quite broad. Are you participating in energy markets or ancillary services markets or other things, reserved services? And how are you thinking about maximizing the revenue from this asset class, which has a lot of regulatory challenges, metering challenges? There's a whole ton of difference between doing stuff in someone's home versus normal demand side response versus grid scale. So how are you thinking about getting all of these batteries into grid scale markets?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is very much fraught with challenges. The key is to look at markets and understand what we can do now. What is the value proposition we can create now? Does it make sense to have a battery tied to solar, without solar? Can we monetize that? Can we create a business case now? And what I would say, at least in the US, is energy is easy. Power products are easy. That kind of follows the model that's been blazed for us around demand response. It was shed load, apply load, the fact that we can go negative, the fact that we could, net inject with a battery, whereas, a thermostat obviously can't do that, is interesting. Some markets recognize our ability to do that and do pay and monetize that. Other markets are zero out your meter. We'll pay you to zero out your meter. That's a great thing for the grid. That's a great thing for the infrastructure. There's money to be had there. From a technology standpoint, we could do all of it. We could do spinning reserves, non-spinning reserves. We could do ancillary services, energy markets, power markets. Resource adequacy, is a big one.
I understand from a technology point of view, just to push you on that, it's possible, but which markets are you actually accessing?
It depends on the market. What I would say, and let's use California as an example. In California, we are actively participating in both energy and power markets. We are actively participating in resource adequacy, and we are actively participating in spinning reserves through some of our partnerships. So a battery is great for this, as long as you have great telemetry rates, and your hardware can respond quickly. Turns out a battery is the fastest, cheapest asset to achieve these goals. It's faster than power plant. It's faster than a thermostat. It's faster than a pump. It's faster than all these things. We can rapidly respond to and dispatch megawatt hours and megawatts from people's batteries in a very efficient way, and that really increases the value of being able to provide those services.
It might sound a little bit odd to our listeners. It certainly did to me to hear of fleet batteries participating in spinning reserve when they don't spin.
That's right. They don't spin. So what is interesting about that is, at least in the US, the idea behind non-spinning reserves is really kind of in its infancy, whereas spinning reserves have been understood for a very long time. So while a battery does not spin, while we are a grid following inverter, in terms of kind of being classified and being able to monetize what a battery can do, it turns out we drop into a lot of spinning reserves classes just because they know how to define it better. But I think in the future, non-spin is actually going to offer better monetization, especially if they value the rapid response time that a battery can bring as opposed to a spinning reserve might.
Let's talk about challenges for a second. So I think we're probably on the same page that there's a massive potential here for virtual power plants and behind the meter batteries to really shape global power markets. But it's not really happening. It is happening, but it needs to go much, much quicker. So my question to you, Geoff, is what is holding us back at the moment? What are the challenges for getting these virtual power plants at mega scale, like totally reshaping power market scale? And are these technical, are these regulatory, are these commercial challenges? How do we make this thing go way, way faster?
Yeah, I think there's two main kind of categories. The first category that kind of holds us back is regulatory. What can you do with a battery? What can't you do with a battery? And then a lot of that comes from either the RTO, the DSO, or in the US, the ISO, the independent system operator kind of area, understanding how these assets interact with the grid, how they can meter them, how they can say, I asked you for 3 megawatts. Did you give me 3 megawatts? And how do I validate that? So regulatory is a big piece. And obviously that regulatory is informed by the commercial piece of it. How do you monetize? How do you value the participation of these distributed assets that are sitting behind utility meters? And that's of major importance to the distribution or the vertically integrated utility, depending on where you're at in the world. How do I value what this homeowner or what this business is doing for me behind the meter, credit them properly, make sure that I'm still also paying for the infrastructure that I've put in place and creating a viable business model? And then how do I push that upstream to my regulators to say, here are the things that we can do, here's how we understand it, here's what how we believe we can read these things, and then here are the technologies that we need to be able to do that. And I think one of the major things that we're seeing shift in the industry right now is metering specifically. For years and years and years, it was the utility meter on the side of the house, that big glass socket meter. That was the Bible. If it
or
ran
if
forward,
you're in Europe, under the stairs often.
under the exactly. If it ran forward, you paid for it. If it ran backwards, they paid you back. Or they didn't. Or they just said, oh, I didn't want the energy. I don't have to pay you. Why am I going to pay you for it? So for years, that was the only way we could true up. That was the only way we could really understand what was happening in that home. And of course, the really old school meters that like have dials, you didn't have any interval data. It was like, well, I read the meter 30 days ago. It was this number. Now it's this number. You have to pay for that delta. As meters have gotten better, as we've gotten to like AMI meters, for example, we get better intervals, 15-minute intervals, 1-hour intervals, whatever it might be, to really understand what are these energy movements. Because I think the key for utilities and the key for regulators is to understand that all kilowatt hours aren't created equal. A kilowatt pushed back into the grid or a kilowatt not consumed during a peak period at say 5 p.m. in the evening in the middle of summer is extremely valuable compared to a kilowatt hour consumed at 2 o'clock in the morning. They are different things. And being able to understand where did that energy come from, how was it used, how was it monetized is really important. And one of the big shifts that we're seeing, again, at least here in the US, is we're starting to see some programs rely on the metering of an energy storage system specifically. They say, okay, we've got our glass meter, that's fine. But if your system includes a revenue grade certified meter, we'd like to access that data and we'd be happy to use your data because you collect it better than we do. You understand the energy movements within the home better than we do, and we can make better decisions. We can monetize better, and we can ensure that these kilowatt hours are being credited to the right stakeholder properly on a minute by minute, second by second basis, whatever is needed.
So we've got a little bit of work to do there, but pretty exciting that you can use I assume you're talking about Sonnen there. You can use one of your installed batteries as a fiscal meter. Is that right? You can actually, I assume you can do all the actual payments and I don't know the right parlance for this, but a fiscal meter.
Yep. Yeah, it is a true monetization meter. So it is a reading, it is a value, it is a level of accuracy that the ISO markets and the utilities are comfortable using. And as long as they have visibility and they know that, that they can validate what's being said and the customer is being billed and credited properly, we are starting to see that in certain markets. Absolutely.
That is awesome. We've got a long way to go in the UK to get there, I think. But that is exactly where we should be heading. Let's talk about the next few years then. Where are virtual power plants, and through the lens of domestic battery systems. Where are these virtual power plants headed? What are you guys excited about in the next 5 years, say? And what are you working on?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say virtual power plant in general, or distributed energy management systems in general, are the backbone of where this is going. I think more and more what you're going to see from the industry is, as they're selling a piece of hardware, it is anchored in that ongoing service. It is anchored in those recurring revenue models, or those recurring savings models for consumers, where you are offering a service where you are professionally monitoring their system, you're managing their system, you are allowing them access to certain portions of the marketplace, like spin and non-spinning reserves. An individual battery homeowner would never have access to monetize their battery to do that, but at aggregate, with the licensing and tools that we have, we're able to do that for our consumers. So it really becomes a customer service model, and the battery is the gateway for it. There are some firms out there that are selling a device, but I think unless it's attached to a stationary energy storage system, you're leaving value on the table, because if it's a device and you're still going back to thermostats or water heaters or pumps or EVs, let's not go down the vehicle to grid rabbit hole too deeply, but if a plugged-in EV is part of that strategy, you come back to the same question: is that car home? Is it plugged in? Does it have reservoir? Has the homeowner said, no, you can't use my battery today because I have to take my wife to the airport in an hour, so I want to opt out of this event? So again, you move right back to this behavior conversation where you have to say, is it available or not? So I think it's absolutely going to be part of the landscape in the future. Absolutely. And I think it will be a secondary device sitting behind and communicative with a stationary energy storage system, and a gateway device that is basically looking at the ecosystem as a whole and making decisions. Can I call in a thermostat? Can I call in a water heater? Can I call in a car? And if the answer to all those is no, you can still say, oh, well, I can still call on the stationary system because it's always available for me.
Yeah, just to comment on, and you said you don't want to go down the vehicle to grid rabbit hole. And I guess that makes sense. If you're in the world of installing stationary storage, then vehicle to grid and stationary storage in the home do generally compete, right? I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough, just personally, is the size difference between those two systems. So generally, I don't know, how many kilowatt hours is a Sonnen home battery typically on average?
Typically in Europe, it's a 20 kilowatt hours. In the US, that tips up a little bit. We have our big houses and large air conditioners. So I think on average, you're seeing 35-ish kilowatt hours in the US.
Wow, that's much bigger than I thought it was. I thought it was in a sort of 10, 15 kilowatt hour range. So, and then a car is probably 70 to 100, or
exactly.
in Texas where we are with the electric Hummers, absolutely huge things.
Massive.
But you're then, it's not an apples and pears conversation, because the EVs have got they're much larger, but the use case is much different. Let's
well, I mean, just to comment on that, Quentin, if I can, I think what would be interesting for us as an industry is to reframe that, where they're not necessarily competing. I think they are. I think stationary energy storage and an EV or multiple EVs are complementary to each other. And I think what we're most interested in, one of the things that we actually monetize today in Europe, is the ability to vary the rate of charge of an EV, not necessarily pulling from the EV, but when you're charging the EV, if you can alter the rate of charge and respond to price signals in the market, whether that be for frequency or for energy, the ability to communicate with these EVs is going to be very, very important. And it holds an enormous potential for the exact reason you said, Quentin, which is it's a massive reservoir that needs to be serviced. And if you can do it more intelligently, there's a lot of money to be had and a lot of savings for consumers to be had.
I must say I'm very bullish on vehicle to grid. I think it really, really excites me. And when I say compete, so I didn't mean competing for market share. I meant more just there is a gross capital cost in battery cells. And so if you have to, a vehicle is something that people will call as is essential, right? They're going to buy something. And so there's a question about the most appropriate use of where to apply that capital in cells and whatnot. But yeah, totally with you. And if you can vary or speed up your charging rate just to get you a few extra miles to get you out the door, if I could do that in the morning and know I could do the nursery drop off with a 10-minute charge, that'll be a game changer for me anyway. Okay, we've got the last two questions now. The first one is, if there's something you want to plug, now is the time. This is your time to pitch, whether you're hiring or you've got a big project or there's something you're excited about. This is the one. And then we're going to get to your contrarian view.
Okay. Yeah, I think the big plug right now is markets are evolving very, very quickly. I think they're evolving extremely quick. I think it is difficult for the built environment, fire code, building code to keep up with, but they're doing their best. I think the plug, and I won't plug a product, I won't plug a market per se. I think what I'll plug is that the industry as a whole needs to continue doing a great job educating and bringing people into the fold. And we need to do a great job of explaining the differences between C and lithium iron phosphate or solid state batteries versus liquid electrolyte based systems, and how we integrate those into our environment, and to make things easier for consumers to then consume and become prosumers. You have to have a very skilled salesperson, a very skilled firm to help you make great decisions today. It's not as easy as it should be. I mean, you could buy a car much easier than you can solar and an energy storage system for your home today. And it simply shouldn't be that. So I think what I would plug is we just need to continue to come together and work as an industry to make this easier to understand, to make this easier to sell, to make this easier to adopt in the built environment, and to understand that it really is key to energy transition. Solar alone doesn't get us there. The sun goes down every day. There are cloudy days. Even where I'm at in San Diego, it gets cloudy here. To have another asset sitting behind it where you can still be an asset to the grid and not just be like, today I'm helpful, tomorrow I'm not, is really important to the industry. And that really excites me, where we're going with this, and how the markets are really enabling further adoption of energy storage systems with or without solar on the roof.
100% agree. It was also a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt, particularly in the consumer world, because the bad news stories, particularly around safety, get amplified, 1,000 times, and because it sells newspapers or whatever. Not to sound too much like a conspiracy theorist, but there's some work to be done there. Now let's go to your contrarian view. What's the thing that you, Geoff, believe that not a lot of other people believe?
Oh, should I keep this industry pertinent?
Honestly, you can go wherever you want. Wherever you want. Everything's on the table.
No. I think we touched on it a little bit. I think what I believe, and this isn't just because I'm in the business selling hardware. I think what I believe is that's a little bit contrary to the rest of the industry, is that connectivity into the home with a firm energy storage, with a battery system, is going to be the anchor of this ecosystem of electrically connected things. I really do. I think 185 kilowatt hour EV, Hummer EV, is awesome. I think we should do great things with that. And we want to make sure that we can continue energy transition. We can do the right things for homeowners and businesses, independent of what somebody's needs might be around an EV or their air conditioner or their pool pump, or for Pete's sake, we once had a customer where he insisted that one of the loads that we needed to back up with his battery was his koi pond, because he had $100,000 koi, and he wanted to make sure that they didn't die in a power outage. So we as an industry need to adapt to those types of things.
Crucially, was it one $100,000 koi, or was
it was multiple $100,000
on aggregate added up to 100,000? Okay.
Yeah. So no, I think each koi was like $100,000. He probably had multi-million-dollar of fish in this pond.
Oh wow!
And he didn't want them to die. So. Is that an NFT? Is that technically an NFT? Koi in a pond? I don't know. I think that's kind of where I'm at, is how do we make those decisions? And I think one of the interesting things that you started to kind of tickle on, and I didn't go down the rabbit hole, was, what if the next car you go buy, Volvo, Ford, Mercedes, whatever, what if that auto manufacturer says, hey, your car comes with an energy storage system and an EV charger that's our brand, because we'd like your car to be part of a larger ecosystem, and we've partnered with Sonnen, for example, to help you do that in a better way. So I think that's a pretty interesting channel that hasn't really emerged yet. I know Mercedes tried it a couple years ago, but it would be interesting to see if cars of the future do come with an energy storage system standard per se, or, a branded charger that is interoperable and bidirectional so that we can realize this full ecosystem.
Very cool. I mean, if the cost curve for battery cells continues to come down as fast as it is, we're going to be throwing batteries at everything. A bit like using solar panels for fencing panels. We're going to have to say it's going to be the same thing.
It's going to be the same thing. I'm with you.
So, Geoff, I want to say a massive thank you to you for coming on the podcast. And to all of our listeners, if you want to check out Sonnen, if you've got a Sonnen battery, then go you. If you want to check out Sonnen and all the stuff they're up to, we're going to put some links in the show notes. And watch this space. VPPs are coming. They're going to have their time.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for having us. It was really a really great conversation.
Thank you for listening to Transmission, a Modo Energy podcast. Transmission delivers conversations from industry leaders and experts exploring energy markets and the operations and technologies related to grid-scale battery energy storage. Check out our other episodes by searching Transmission wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the Energy Academy, our video crash course on how markets in Great Britain and ERCOT work, or head to modoenergy.com to see our written research. Thanks for listening.